the same up front, they would have the identical same payback period, but look at the difference. So it's just, I mean, it's just like the energy savings over time calculated back. So just to go through these methods, which ones which, and which ones are, there's pros and cons to using these. So payback, it's easy to compute, it's easy to understand, it's often used, but as I said, it can be problematic for you and actually undersell the future value of this measure that you're implementing. And it ignores the time value of money. And ROI, again, is pretty simple. People sort of understand it intuitively, but it doesn't take into account variations in savings over the years. It ignores the time value of money, so that money is more valuable to us today than in the future, basically. And NPR and IRR are starting to do this, but it's a little bit, there's a few more steps to calculating them. So here's an example, just comparing that, just to make this point one more time. For example, let's compare two projects that both require an initial investment of $100,000. So both have the same payback period of 2 years. Both require an investment today. This one, however, only has 2 years of energy savings. This one has much longer, out to 10 years. So here, if you have a net present value, you can see it's a much better investment. Payback would not tell you any of that. And then what you can do is if you have a bunch of options, so we had all those sticky notes, so they can be all the options. You can group the ones that have the same payback period and then rank them by the net present value or by IRR. Okay, so here are just some lists of benefits and costs in these calculations that you'll need to consider and get some data on. The purchase price, if there is one. Some of these measures don't require any initial purchase price, right? But if you have to buy something, you have to buy it. How much is it? But also think about installation cost, maintenance cost, because we're talking about time, maintenance cost over time. If you have to alter in some way existing equipment, and if there are any consulting fees that go along with that, whether that's yours or someone else's. Just some other costs to remember to include to make this really actually come true and be realistic. And on the benefits side, think about obviously the reduced energy use, the projected or what you think the baseline is and what the savings are for the different types of energy, and also potentially reduced maintenance costs. Or savings, so say you've got a client who wants to be carbon neutral or be super green and buy renewable energy. Well, if you're using less energy, then they have to buy less offsets and they have to buy less renewable energy to make up the difference. So you can start to factor these in as benefits, right? Has anyone ever added benefits that are not on this list into an actual financial model? I mean, we talked a bit about, employee productivity and indoor air quality. It's harder to put in a financial model, frankly. But it's a great thing to talk about and to put some numbers on, just not necessarily in your model directly. And we'll get into sort of contextual information to go along. So some data requirements, I think I just covered this. So you will want to know energy prices for your energy savings analysis, and these do vary, but depending on what region you're in and which the utility is, you can usually, there's some forward pricing models that you can include here for the type of energy that's going to be used and the time period. So not all of these energy conservation measures have the same time period. Some, will only, if they're Energy Star laptops, it's probably going to be turned over every 3 or 4 years, right? So they're going to be, think about the lifespan of the equipment, how long it's actually in use of, and also think about the lifespan of the lease and how long that tenant is going to get the benefits for. If they're only there for, a few years, then some of those really long savings going out sort of 20 years, they may care less about. because they're not going to get the benefit of those. Okay, so now we're going to do an exercise, and I'm going to base it on a case study. I think you worked on this case study. But the numbers are different than your numbers because we tweaked them to make the case study a bit, the conservation measures are a little more different to each other, so don't take the numbers as actual. The real case study is going to be sent to you all with the actual numbers. Okay, so big caveat on that. These numbers are a little bit tweaked and a little bit made up just to make the calculations a bit more easy. Would you mind passing them out? So the context here is a medium-sized law firm office fit-out. It's new space for them. It's a 10-year lease. They are very interested in promoting their green credentials, and they are interested in saving money. The energy analysis is done. We have the list of energy conservation measures. You guys don't have to figure that out. We also very kindly calculated the savings for you, so you don't have to do that. But your job is to calculate the return on investment and the payback period for some of them, where they're blank. And some of these energy conservation options will yield energy savings for the building and some for the tenant and some for both. So there's 2 pages. Here are the energy conservation measures that have been identified. These are in the rows of the table. So we have automatic receptacle controls, as we heard about this morning, efficient HVAC systems, buying Energy Star equipment, LED lighting, a basic package of LED lighting, and a more advanced or enhanced package of LED lighting, lighting controls, like basic lighting controls, an enhanced package of lighting controls, and virtualized servers. So they're reducing the number of physical servers, data servers on their site. And then these ones, if you keep going down the list, don't require any initial investment. So they're adopting regular business hours. They're changing their power management settings. They're raising the temperature in the building by 2 degrees during business hours. And then they're raising cooling settings and so on. So some of them require investment, some don't. So what I want you to do is get out a pen. If you don't have a pen, we have extra. Fill in the blanks. So I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to do a little math. You can use a calculator, no problem, if you have one on your phone. And then at the bottom of the worksheet, on the back, there's additional questions, which I do want you to get to. And we're going to discuss them as a group. So 10 minutes, and hope you enjoy doing your maths assignment. For people following along on the online webinar, you're just going to have to hold tight during this section, and we'll be back to you to discuss with these in about 10 minutes. Okay, I'm just going to give you one more minute. Hopefully you can finish up so that we can sort of compare some of these options. All right, pens down. This is a very exam-like atmosphere in here right now. So I'm actually going to give you the results so you can just like compare what you did. I'm not going to test you on it. But I do want to discuss it a little bit and find out from you all what your kind of high-level recommendations would be. So, you know, you could make combinations of these different energy conservation measures and so on. But which options or ECMs did you find had the best ROI and payback period for the tenant? Let's start with that. Who would like to say which was number one for them? Yep. Which is number 7? Let me get it handy. Okay. So the enhanced LED lighting package, or the basic one. Why is that? Why did you think that? Okay, but that's 20 years till it pays back. So that's actually really bad. Just so you found the HVAC one. Which number is that? Yep, for payback, yep, 4 years. How about the enhanced lighting controls, so number 10? What's the payback period there? I mean, I just gave you the answer so you can see how off you were, but yes.
Number 8?
Yep. So virtualized servers. Yeah. Virtualized servers has the best payback.
Oh, I thought out of what we had to calculate.
Yeah, well, of what you had calculated.
Trick question.
Depends how quick you were on your calculation if you got to it and how accurate you were as well. Yes? Seeing as what, sorry?
The upfront cost is under the tenant, so how do you calculate a payback or ROI for the building if they didn't fund it?
Yeah, that's a good question. You can't. So then you have to think, if you're not, so these measures 12 to 16, they don't require any upfront investment. Therefore, you can't talk about return on that investment or payback for that matter, because there's nothing to pay back. They don't cost anything upfront. They're much better because for that reason, right? But what you can do is talk about the cash, the savings that over year on year that they're going to generate and add them up into a big number and say zero down all of these savings. So that's a good observation and the one I wanted you to make, because it's important that many of these energy conservation measures, yeah, don't cost anything, which is great, but they do cost some time and labor. So you could think about, you know, the hassle factor if you want. And if you really wanted to make the case and you had a very critical audience, it's probably better to address that up front and say, yes, it will take this many hours and this is the hourly rate and it'll cost that in hours as an investment, but still going to probably come out pretty good, pretty well. Okay, so on the ROI, which had the best ROI for the tenants? The virtualized server again. I mean, if you present this ROI of like 1,900, that's pretty good. I mean, that's pretty amazing compared to most, you know, investments someone could make. Yeah, on the cloud.
Do you consider that a real beacon?
It is, because from an energy point of view, it is, because the big data centers are managed much more efficiently than anyone's little data centers at their office.
There's a program at NYSERDA that offers incentives.
Yeah, do you want to repeat that? So there's a program. Okay, so there's a program, I'll just repeat it for people online who can't hear, at NYSERDA offering incentives for virtualizing servers. And I'm sure they have some supporting evidence of how great this is. Plus, if you're getting an incentive program. Now, some of those, sorry, was there another?
So is the assumption that your AWS bill will go up because you're going to pay another vendor more?
Right, exactly.
So, even though
so
you
do you include it in here or not?
ROI, you have to offset it.
Yeah. So here, we just looked at cash flows from the energy. And this is the other thing I wanted to bring out, is that you want to make sure that you're being holistic in this to the organization. So yes, they may have to pay, and they would pay, say, Amazon or Google, whoever's hosting these virtual servers, you know, an amount, you know, a service fee for that, which will reduce the total ROI that we see here. And you have yeah, so there are additive effects to this. So you save on square footage because, or, you know, you can make more efficient use of the space because you don't have a server room anymore. You also don't need to cool that server room anymore. You don't have to have ventilation for that. So it has many benefits that you can start to add up as well. However, think about your client, right? At my firm in Cambridge, Massachusetts, we have a server room, and we just did an office renovation, and we really wanted to virtualize our server. The problem is that we do a lot of work for the US federal government, and they require us to have servers. So it was just a no-go. And they have to be a certain type and maintained, and there's a lot of security protocols around that. So, you know, we tried as the green team, but it was just no. But what we did do is move the place of the server to a better spot. So, yep.
Just wanted to add, this is when you can really speak to the point of other costs.
Yes.
What is the management cost of bringing one IT team, and then there's often another IT team involved, and then there's the real estate team, and it's a very big coordination cost.
Yes, there's coordination cost and just involving more people. You know, you're going to be talking to the IT people now, as well as the facilities, as well as the, you know, so there is definitely some barriers to doing this stuff. But, you know, from presenting the financials point of view, it's good to put in some of those assumptions and make sure they're represented. Otherwise, the IT team will go, you're not including, like our friend here, you're not including that cost. So you want to think about the objections you're going to get and just incorporate it. It's pretty straightforward to include labor cost. If you can make some assumptions of how many hours, what's the average rate, overhead it's going to take, and make it, you know, back up your assumptions, write them down, and include it in the model. And still, we're going to end up probably with a pretty good return. So the other thing I wanted to bring out on these, some of these options, 12, 13, 14, 15, but let's say 12 in particular. we're talking about adopting regular business hours. Is this feasible for a law firm in New York City? No. Unlikely. But, you know, perhaps, as we were talking about before, some teams in the law firm are going to be working late, other teams are not, so you can group the teams that are working late on the same floor. So be a bit thoughtful about it, and then have, you know, some floors closing down or becoming much hotter or colder at a certain point, and because people aren't using it. Do you have any experience on doing that you'd like to share? Did that go down well when you guys suggested that with the client? Anyone experience that?
I mean, yes, and sometimes there's a no to that, but it depends on the client, I think.
Right.
And like we talked about different ways of achieving something similar earlier this morning, and for some clients, maybe the idea of having pizzas in the pizza and refreshments in a space after hours is going to work, and for others it's not. One example I've seen in the past, which was where I've seen a case study for it in the past, was the UK Department of Energy and Climate Change, which actually created an app where you would basically see everyone who was saying they were going to work late, and you got points if you signed up to work late in the after hours area. And so it's kind of gamification of that, which is taking it to another level, and really worked with people that were really engaged with this type of stuff, but might not work with people that are not.
Yeah, there's also just cultural things. Like, the thing that comes to my mind with that is, like, then they really know what you're doing all the time. So do you really, you know, want to have a culture of workplace that's sort of very command and control, or not? And some organizations are fine with that. Some generations are fine with that. Some are really not. So really understand what you think. And, you know, it's not just about the numbers after all. It's about the people using the spaces and what's going to work for them. So, you know, have the numbers to support the recommendation, and the recommendation can be a bit more holistic than just what's the best IRR here. Okay, let me see what else. So for the building owners, were there any big differences in for the building itself in terms of those? What are the best options that carried over to them? They're actually, in this case, pretty similar findings, but you do see, you know, cases where it's very clear that the building will benefit, and very clear that, or the tenant, or, you know, some sort of mixed situation where they're both benefiting. And again, these measures that we're sharing here are these mainly geared towards the operating expenses. They're not talking about building value of that asset over the longer term. They may influence the value of the space in terms of tenant satisfaction and productivity, and that they're happy to stay there because they're in this efficient space. It's costing them less, and so that adds value over the longer term, but it's a different valuation technique for the building or the asset from the building owner's point of view. One thing we didn't include here was the net present value and IRR calculations, because it's very hard to do on paper. But again, you know, it's pretty easy to do in Excel. So we're going to make these worksheets available through a shared drive later. And we've included the IRR and NPV calculations in that, so you can see as well how they look. And we just used it, we assumed, I think, an 8% discount rate across the board, just to make it simple. Okay, so let's just go back to this question of ROI and payback. It's not unique to energy conservation. Solar also has this issue. If you just talk about payback from solar point of view, might be, you know, a 10-year payback, but the IRR over its lifetime of 25 years is 8.8%. So, you know, you can get. Then if you have this interest rate kind of idea with IRR, you can compare it to, like, if I had a pool of money and I was going to spend it on solar, or I was just going to save it and put it in a savings account or invest it somewhere else, what's the different rate of return, right? That's the value of using IRR, because you can actually start to compare it to other investment opportunities. So what would definitely get you 8.8% return right now? Certainly not a savings account. Yeah.
Renewables for 10 years, and that was very, very common right there.
Right. This is a common example in renewables. Yeah.
Stock market averages, 8%, so, it's identical.
Yep. Yeah. Because you're talking about cash flow in the future. Yeah.
Just something I like to say. Something I sometimes like to say about this with solar PV. No one ever asks for a payback period on investment in a corporate bond or a gilt.
Right.
It's just not appropriate to do. It's
yeah, and I think people have just gotten into asking about payback periods with these sorts of measures in particular. People don't ask about payback periods for a marketing campaign, do they? I mean, well, when's the marketing going to pay you back? It's very intangible. It's very valuable. We all know that, but there's not an immediate payback that you can pinpoint. So it's kind of an interesting barrier as a community we need to get over. So I want to shift now into okay, we have some results. Let's think about how to present them in an impactful way. So you have your data, you have all these percentages lined up in a nice table. Before you just send the table to your client, think about what metrics and formats they use regularly. So if they're coming across a really dense report with tons of tables, they're really busy people and they're really not that into this topic and you're trying to convince them to do it, that report's going to land with a thud. If you're able to look at how do they usually communicate internally on investment decisions, ask them, can you just send me a sample presentation for something else? I don't care about the context, black out the name. How do you talk? Do you talk in PowerPoint? Are things sent to each other in reports? Are they memos? Are they one-pagers? Are they, big, long reports? Some clients are very, diligent. Some are really just send me the list of what you recommend. I trust you. So understand how they usually communicate. And my one advice here is mimic it. You just want there not to be a barrier to them understanding the information. If you don't really know, then it's on you or if it's doesn't work for you for one reason or another, think about design in this context as well. And I think people often just think about this sort of material and not in communications, but in the end it's communicating, right? It's communicating your recommendation based on a lot of analysis, but your recommendation is the point. So make sure that point is front and center. So if you have a report, for example, you want to start it with the conclusion, do these 3 things, and then back it up. So it's a bit like a legal argument. You start with the conclusion, and then you say, and for these reasons, and then you repeat it again at the end. Rather than walk through the whole analysis, and the very last page, there are the conclusions. Because you'll lose a lot of people, and it's fine to repeat things. So put it at the beginning and the end. And then just apply principles of good visual design. Next, I'm going to walk through some examples for you. But generally, 1 message per graph. Okay, and make that, and really look at it and think, what am I trying to say here? Because it's really easy to layer in lots of, with data. It's fun. You can have double axes. You can have different lines. Some of this stuff is complex. So and for people who enjoy that stuff, that's fine. But for people who are trying to make a quick decision, not fine. So 1 message per graph or table, and really look hard at what information really needs to be there. And information includes lines, it includes little stripes, it includes colors, it includes, all sorts of bad graphic design examples in this space that you come across. And what's sort of distracting. Big numbers tend to grab people's attention. So instead of expressing something as like annual savings in kilowatt hours, you may not even be able to contextualize how many kilowatt hours. Say it in dollars and say it over 10 years, this big number. You've got to save that. Because that'll grab attention, and then they can see what you based that on. And then they'll go in and look for the detail if they're interested. Okay? And then color should have a purpose, use it wisely. Also know, do they print things out in color? That's sometimes a problem. You think, oh, it's a beautiful, colorful graph, and then you get there and it's printed out in black and white and none of the detail is there. So sort of know how they're actually going to be using this information. It's just tactics, but it helps. And now let's look at a few examples. sorry, before we go to examples, this for your models, for building your models, is a really good template. It's dynamic in that if you enter the data, it'll build a nice graph for you. And it has ROI and payback, NPV in there as well. So it's a downloadable from the Urban Land Institute, and it's specific for tenant spaces. So it's a great resource. So let's look at tables, okay? Wall Street Journal, New York Times, economists, they know what they're doing with tables. Take a critical eye at some point and just look from a design point of view on how they communicate a lot of numbers in a way that you can make sense of it pretty quickly. This one is like case studies of residential solar power in different cities, where the rebates are, what the payback period is, cumulative lifetime. You know, it's really neat. Doesn't have anything you don't need to know. It's consistent. It uses color nicely. It uses these indents very clearly. So these sorts of tables to present these sorts of results can be a nice way of sort of crystallizing the message and showing comparable information. Here's actually from our case study. So this is payback period, and this is not a great example. I wanted to show you, like, it takes a little while. So we've got the upfront costs, payback period. Okay, so we're seeing here the LED lighting basic has a really high payback period. That's not, in this case, we're often used to seeing like on this side of a graph is good and on that. In this case, it's inverse. So this may seem like a really good recommendation, but it's in fact not. It's way off, you know, what we want are these guys down here. So if you were to use a graph like this, it's fine. Put a big circle around it with an arrow saying, good. Yay, we like this. I mean, it sounds silly, but people literally have 5 seconds to look at a graph and understand it. So you've got to think, what can you understand in 5 seconds? You know? Or if they're scrolling on their phone, oftentimes people are reading reports now on their phones. What can you look at on a screen and make sense of it quickly? You know, they're not printing out a lovely report and reading it calmly in their office. That rarely happens these days. So if you are in a situation of presenting payback, that's fine. Really emphasize, these are nice because they show the break-even point. It's there. But the nice part is they show all the benefits as well, right? So you're drawing attention to this big green bucket of savings that they're going to get, not to where the break-even point is. And here, they've done this one, you know, 7.5 years, and oh, there's money. I mean, it sounds so silly, but it does catch the eye and show you very clearly you are going to save money over this long period of time. Was that a bird? Oh. Yeah. Here's another example. It's a British one where they're showing the return on investment for different options, you know, different energy conservation measures. And they say the product cost, year one total of the savings, and then the return on investment, and then they're adding it up, which is nice. And you can sort of visually see that they're adding it up, and then you get this total ROI here that's a great, you know, big number, as I said. And they're using color, you know, strategically, and it's not too crazy with the color. Now, I don't know, if you have more than 3 or 4, might look a little crazy. So if you had 20 measures like this, I think that would be a bit too much. You may want to think of a different thing. But if you've narrowed it down to sort of 3 options or 3 packages of options, and you can show how they're adding together and add up those ROIs, great. Okay, this is my colleague. I asked her to make me a really ugly graph, and she's a designer, and this is as ugly as she could make it, which I laughed because I was like, oh, it's not that bad. But anyway, it is confusing. So here, this is our same case study, actually.
That it stopped at 2 hours, I guess. Perhaps.
Oh, I don't know what. Oh, yeah, there's another mic going on. So we have 2 axes: payback period, ROI. We have the options here. we have, so this is the ROI percentage, and this is the payback years. So, but it's really hard to understand because, like, is big good? In this case, no. In this axis, big is not good. In this axis, big is good. So that's not clear communication. It's also like too many colors, too many dotted lines. So I guess you did manage to make it confusing. So if you were looking at this, you'd be like, what are they recommending? I don't understand.
All right, I will tell him.
Okay.
Thank you.
And then if we try to improve it, still using 2 axes, but just take the colors, it's better, but it's still not quite there yet. So, I mean, I think it would be better just to separate the content, treat payback in its own graph, treat ROI in its own graph. You don't need both, because it's still confusing, big is big better or not, okay? What's better within this that's, you know, working a little better is that you're at least highlighting the better options here. The problem is this payback, you know, that looks like not a good thing because it's small. But this is clearly, you know, better. So it takes, you know, time. And if you have your data set up nicely in Excel, you can do lots of graphs very quickly and easily to see what works, okay? You could do a donut. You could do a, you know, it's not hard to iterate. And then once you've settled on, okay, this is a clear message, then you can make the colors and the lines and get rid of all the, you know, you don't need, my pet peeve is all the little, you know, notches on the axes and those axis lines. You just can get rid of all of that noise. You can do it in Excel. You don't need a special graphic design program to do any of that.
But you know,
yes?
That chart, although it's complicated,
yeah.
It actually says a lot.
Yeah, I think it's much better.
It helps kind of explain the whole payback period versus ROI.
Yeah.
And the one is little and one is more. So, I mean, if you've got a client that actually does understand it a little bit, to kind of combine the stuff and not have more.
It's not a bad one. I'll tell my colleague. And also think about, are you going to be presenting it? In which case, yes, you could do that. Because you could say, here on this axis, and big is not good. And here on, but if you're not presenting it, or if you are and then they're taking it away, you know, write some things on the side to help people navigate it if you're not there to say it. And you'll see this is a kind of consulting trick that oftentimes, you know, you have the answer or the main point as a heading across, and then the first thing you read on a slide is often the title, so you can say result. This ECM is the recommendation, and then the graph just supports that. So think about the, you know, not just the chart, but also the title. And here's another, you know, idea or option. You can do it as like a little scorecard, where you have a snapshot, you know, result. So here, there's total energy savings. You have like, which is equivalent to, you know, this much. So giving some context to that number. Is that big? Is that small? You have types of benefits. The building savings. The tenant is saving $80,000 a year. Payback period, ROI. You know, so you can give them a few different measures if you don't know what they use. Okay, and then just finally, these are my last 2 sort of slides, and then we're going to have a discussion. So again, make sure your recommendations are clearly stated. Don't bury the lead. Make it, you know, especially in this day and age, people literally are reading on their phones on the subway on the way to work, and they're making decisions as they do that. So make your recommendations stand out and are very easy to understand. Support, you know, by qualitative and quantitative arguments. Use big numbers if you can without it being, you know, gimmicky. Stay true to the content. But, you know, if it's an annual savings, just add it up over 10 years if you think it's a 10-year lease, because that'll make them say, oh, that's actually $1 million, you know, rather than $100,000 a year, you know. And then, you know, you can, if you know more about their organization, show how these results compare to alternative investment, you know, options that they have, because they may be surprised at how good some of these actually are. Or to the relative cost of the total fit out. Like you're spending, you know, $10 million on this renovation. These, you know, energy conservation measures are going to be $250,000 and look at the returns, is that really a problem, to spend that amount to get these returns? So you can sort of, put it in context for them of their overall budget. Or you could express it in terms, this works less with offices, but maybe something that we've done in some retail context is say, so these energy savings are going to save you this much. The equivalent for you to grow your sales to your bottom line, to profitability, is going to be, you'd have to grow your sales per store by 15% to achieve the same rate. And, imagine how would we do that? It'd be very difficult because these are low margin businesses. So, if you can express it in like the equivalent to doing that in sales would be X for them. If you have that sort of information, then they're going to pay more attention. And they're going to see, oh, this really does help me be more profitable. You can also, and we talked about this last week, you can, say, well, what others are achieving. Use names that they might respond to of organisations that they've heard of, or competitors, or large organisations that they think are cool, or that you think are cool, to have that recognition, brand sort of recognition effect of like, everyone else is doing this, you should too. And that's what you're implying. You don't say that, right? You put, the names and the brands and the logos there to say, give them some sort of proof, social proof that this is quite common, and the sense that, they can keep going. And finally, on co-benefits, what we mean by that is, beyond the financial savings that we've just talked through, what outcomes we might achieve from this in sort of things that we find socially valuable. So a good example here is, comparing it to, this is equivalent to greenhouse gas emissions, annual electricity use for 6 homes for a year, or 10 passenger vehicles, or Empire State Buildings, or number of ambulances. There's all sorts of calculator tools out there. You don't need to do this yourself. I've listed a source, and we can send this, some other references here. There's all sorts of calculators you can plug in and say, what would that be equivalent to? And then putting some nice graphics alongside that. Because, with this sort of thing, it's very intangible. It's hard to sort of imagine how, is that a big number? Is that a small number? I have no idea. I'm in the environmental space and been working on it. I sometimes get confused, like how much does that really? And if you can put it in like very tangible things that you can visualize, it's very helpful to people, buy into that idea that this is creating social good and how much social good. All right, does anyone, we're going to transition now to sort of a discussion, but does anyone have any examples of presenting financial results in a really effective way that you'd like to share, or things that you've done that you think could have been done better and why? Yep.
Just what you talked about earlier, I think simplifying it is excuse me, what Anastasia mentioned earlier is key. Keep it simple. Make the information clear, easy to digest, and that's really key. As long as the numbers will support the, support what you're trying to sell or
yeah, trying to recommend. Yeah.
The numbers should just like sell themselves.
Yeah,
but simplicity is key.
Get rid of the noise.
Yep.
Yeah, and then you can always have a table at the back that really gives them the breakdown for the people who really want to see, that, and so you may have different audiences, so give them both, but just make sure that it's the executive summary, but really make it a summary and make it really clear why you think is the best option and why. Other examples? Okay, so I think now we're gonna, I've got 2 mics going on here. Now we're gonna, we wanted to have a quick sort of discussion to wrap up today. Do you guys want to come up to the front? And we're seeing as we're all here together, we thought it would be really useful to talk through and get some thoughts on. So we talked a bit before the break about the commercial tenant program, what would be useful to get, to get that program, I don't know, even more used or out in the world, or I don't know. Sophie,
Yes.
maybe you want to frame the question on that
Certainly.
one.
I mean, you know, we're always looking for feedback. We're always looking for ways to improve the program. We're actually in the process of iterating on the design of the program, so we're looking for, we are going to be expanding it. As I mentioned earlier during my introduction, we are going to be extending the date of the program as well. So we're all ears. We're always looking to better understand what it is that the market needs from us. So your insights and your input is welcome. So any ideas around what we can do at NYSERDA specifically to help support your work in incorporating energy efficiency in tenant spaces, any gaps or opportunities, you know, beyond just providing more money to buy down the cost of the ECMs, anything else that we could potentially do in terms of developing resources or tools, or you know, helping you in supporting a process that you think might be helpful. So again, you know, anything that you might want to share with us is welcome.
Yep.
On that, we've all been talking about more marketing by NYSERDA. If you can share a marketing calendar with us, we would be able to mirror your efforts with our own campaign.
What do you mean by calendar?
If there's if there is a blast that you're doing to excite, you know, the CT commercial tenant program to developers and building owners and tenants, we would be able to copy that and send it to our clients.
Uh-huh.
For renovations, you know, there's the energy codes, and so some of the items actually may be required.
Yep.
So it's good to be aware of what the energy code is, and then they actually don't have a choice. They have to do it. You know, things like LED lighting, lighting controls. So, you know, it's good to be aware of what the energy codes are actually requiring.
Yeah, we were talking about that in the break a little bit, that we wanted to bring that up as a topic. So from the program point of view, would you look to the NYSERDA program to educate you about those, or to give you checklists on like what's in code, what's not? Would that be what would be helpful from them?
If it's a renovation, actually for the building owner or the tenant,
yeah.
energy lighting, for example, something that you have to do.
Yeah.
It's not a choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the question of energy codes, because it is something that is continuously increasing. New York City is adopting the stretch code in 2019, so the codes are going to keep on getting more and more stringent. And you know, as proponents of incorporating energy efficiency in tenant spaces, we're very aware that that kind of compresses the opportunities, if you will. I think it just means that, you know, it's an impetus on all of us to think creatively and to think about how to push the envelope. So to take it back to the commercial tenant program, we don't necessarily require that you go above a certain percentage in terms of performance. So we don't say you have to be 20% above energy code or 10% or 5% to participate. We really just want to encourage the community to think about pushing the envelope. Some spaces are not meeting code, so right there, you know, you already have that. Right, so you have opportunities to bring it to code, and right there, that's going to be a whole bunch of energy savings. And then for new space fit outs, then, you know, certainly we encourage you to think about the occupancy questions, advanced controls, you know, plug load management, some of the unregulated things at this point, you know, high efficiency equipment, you know, some of the more innovative ECMs that have more to do with layout, that have to do with how energy is consumed in a space from a more behavioral perspective, which could be linked to space utilization, which is something that we've talked about as part of these case studies as well. So there are definitely still opportunities for, you know, going above code. And I also want to introduce Myra Lujan, who works with me in the commercial tenant program, and she just whispered in my ear that we offer trainings at NYSERDA on energy code as well. So that is something you might want to look into as well.
There's sponsored trainings called Beat the Energy Code. And I see them maybe once every quarter, and they have them specifically for residential, multifamily, commercial, so that always helps too. But yeah, we take different baselines for these programs, so it's either the existing baseline, or for new designs, it would be energy code, and we'll see everything else that we can do.
Was there another point at the, yeah, there was one at the very back and then second row back.
We found with building owners, but also with tenants, whatever they're aware of that's happening in the news. So a lot of times we're talking about solar, even though it's not related, because solar's coming down to grid parity, cost is cheap, they're aware of that, or they're aware of solar tariffs with Trump or whatever it is. They're not aware of the nickels and dimes on their energy efficiency. You'd think they would be, but they're not. So part of that linking is part of our sales practice.
Yeah, I think it's also just a question of visibility, like, because you can see panels. So if you do like a Google image search for like energy efficiency, you get solar panels. And it's like, well, it's not really the same thing, but because they're just sort of these things that look nice in photos, everyone knows about them, and you know, they're great in many contexts, but yeah, I think there's a bit of a visibility, like how to make this, like, the fact that you're spending less over time, you know, make that more tangible. And you can do that with graphs, but yeah.
To the relating it to solar panels, solar is so popular out there, and obviously tenants can't do that. So that might be an opportunity to say this savings would be equivalent to installing this many solar panels.
Yeah.
So that's you can link your information to something that's very popular out there. Or Tesla or something, I don't know, some other.
Could you pass the mic?
First of all, thank you for extending the program. You know, I would like to say that as well. I think it's a very valuable program, maybe been harder for us to deploy than we first thought. So sessions like this are very welcome, and I just want to reinforce that statement because I really appreciate that, and I know many of our clients do as well. For your question about things to consider in the next edition, I know we've discussed some of these already. I know you're already on top of some of them. I just want to highlight them because I think they are important. I've heard from our clients that they're important, and maybe some other people have further ideas around them. One is risk. Sales are often about emotions.
Yeah.
People hate surprises, like you said last time as well, and risks can bring surprises. So when we talk about the full 100% cost share, you know, it involves some skin in the game, and I think it's very fair of you to require that. However, if I was to feed back concerns from clients, they are concerned when they see, oh, so I might not get 100% cost share for your service unless I implement everything. Like you say, you know, way up to almost 100% of the projects do get full cost share. So the risk is so low, but they still worry about that to the extent that we, you know, evaluate. Maybe we just say there's a 50% cost share. If you can add further clarity and reassurance around this, adding the statistics from the past, or even consider raising it from 50% to 75% and then have a 25% gap, I think it would be very important for onboarding people because sometimes they're so busy, this is such a low priority, that if there's risk involved, they prefer, you know, committing that
it's sort of an easy reason
else.
To say no,
yeah.
Right?
So one is risk, another one is really good idea about coordinating with capital incentive programs. I heard that you're thinking about working closer with Con Ed, for example. Many have been worried about that. They say, oh, good, I get a study for what I can improve, but I know that I have so little budget to do this on unless I also have the capital incentives. However, I heard the capital incentives are such a fuss. They're slippery to get hold of, et cetera, et cetera. So you are in a much stronger position than us individual companies to leverage the entire program and feedback to, you know, advocate for that. That would mean very, very much. So that's another one. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. certainly, you know, we're always, in designing these incentive programs, we're always thinking about, you know, delivering useful services that are cost effective, right? I mean, we're dealing with ratepayer funds, so we have to be very strategic, and we receive a lot of scrutiny as to how we disperse the funds. So we're always thinking, is 50% good enough to help us get there? Is it 75? Is it 100? If we don't require customers to have skin in the game, does that mean that they just, you know, we'll just do this because it's free, but then they won't do anything with the report or the recommendation? So there are definitely ongoing discussions and debates that we have internally about what is the best program design for these types of technical assistance programs. But point well taken that no one likes risk, right, when it comes to making investment decisions. And then coordinating with Con Ed or utilities in general, that is something that we're also very much focused on. And specifically for doing work in tenant spaces, we know that there are barriers if a tenant doesn't pay their bills and doesn't have a bill in their name and it doesn't show that SBC contribution. I just want to clarify that tenants can participate in the Con Edison incentive programs even if they don't have a bill in their name and the landlord is willing to apply on their behalf, they can then pass the incentive through. So that is something that we've confirmed with Con Ed. That is something that Con Ed can do. And beyond that, we're also very much actively working with Con Ed to create a more seamless path for a tenant to come to us for the technical assistance, the energy study, and then go straight to Con Ed for the incentive. And that is something that we're currently working on. And hopefully with the release of the new program the next few months, while it's not an actual component of the program, it is something that we're working through on our end in terms of our business processes to help facilitate that process so that tenants can have greater reassurance that they will be able to get Con Ed incentives if they are in fact eligible for them.
And then just the last suggestion, which is also one we've discussed, but maybe there's, well, first of all, I'll say it. So I think it's a good idea to have access to some financing externally beyond the incentives. So, if there are financial institutions willing to put down loans or financing, I know that some clients would appreciate that because they can't always find it internally. But since it's an open discussion, is there anything we can do on our side to help you build the case for that?
That's a good question.
I mean, to keep the feedback coming, and I think, we are always looking for case studies as well. I mean, this is the case studies, that we shared with you today were a long time in the making. But again, we're constantly looking for data. We're looking for information about what works, what doesn't work, so that we can then put together the resources that we can, put back out into the marketplace to assist the broader community and to really enable this work to happen. So, we are constantly asking for feedback. We're constantly, doing stakeholder engagement. So, we appreciate your participation in those processes as well, because that definitely helps to inform how we develop our programs.
Yeah, and we're also always trying to understand what your challenges are. We have been thinking about this for the last 2 years, but there's always new information and maybe things that we haven't thought of for the smaller companies versus the bigger companies. So we'll love to hear that, and we'll try to solve some of those challenges. And more importantly, bring us your ideas and bring us pilots. So if there's something that you didn't see here that could drive energy efficiency, and maybe you've thought about it and it's a different idea, we'll love to hear about it, and we'll definitely try to work with you.
And one more thing that we haven't mentioned yet so far that's going to be a little bit of a game changer. In 2020, New York City is going to be implementing the building energy labeling. So just like your restaurant, buildings will get a letter grade that they'll have to post on their doors. So that's going to hopefully incentivize people, that sort of social context that Anastasia was talking about. Seeing a B- on your door doesn't feel as good when you have to walk by it every day, sort of thing. So.
An F.
Sorry?
Be on the building.
Yep. It has to be,
Has to
yeah,
be.
it's going to be on the building. And this is the sort of thing that, you know, like the code, you can go to a client and say, okay, code says this, and by the way, did you know that this is coming? So you may want to get ahead of that. And then once it's implemented, what are you doing about that? So it's nice to bring news to people, to have a sort of a time-bound, motivating thing that they can work on. And I think there's some ideas. I have cooking about recognition for the individuals, such as they're in the room or participating in the program, that you can make their names and their case studies, but also their names as contractors and firms participating in this program more visible, and so they can promote it as well and get the word out that way, because they'll be listed there, and then people looking for such consultants can find the ones who are already experienced in that. So I think there's some work to could be done on recognition, one way or the other. Any other ideas? Otherwise, I think we're going to wrap up. Do you want to do the wrap up?
So just to recap on what we covered today, here's some of the major takeaways. Commercial offices represent 59% of the square footage in New York City. So there's no shortage of tenant spaces to go around. Energy efficiency and design go hand in hand. Doing it up front really, really makes a difference, long-lasting impact. And don't forget those plug loads. 33% of the current energy is being used by those little vampires in the room. Just in time for Halloween, we can start addressing those. And don't forget about behaviors and processes. As we mentioned, Energy Code is dictating a lot of those equipment level requirements. So think outside the box, dig a little bit deeper. Let's get creative with how to implement energy efficiency. And for a value proposition, make sure you know your audience. You want to sell your product, and the best way to do that is to know what they're looking for and how to best sell to them. NPV and IRR are much greater than payback. If you can present your findings in those terms, it's much more compelling in the energy efficiency space. And lastly, when you're presenting your findings, use big numbers and design to convey persuasive messages. Thank you all for coming. Feel free to come up and chat with us. Here's our contact information if you have any questions. And we'll be sending the slides out to all of you early next week, along with the resources that we've referenced, so that you can take these and go forward in your business. Thank you all.
Sorry, I'm just gonna say one more thing. If you're interested in talking about this with your company, I'll be happy to set up meetings and have conversations with your team as well. Happy to develop materials that they might need. And the same thing goes for if you're thinking about presenting this to a client and would like to have a NYSERDA representative at that meeting. I'm definitely available and will be happy to support you as much as possible. So to the idea that somebody had mentioned about having one person that you can reach out to and that will be somebody who can support you as much as possible, we definitely have that resource, and that's me. So give me a shout.
Hey everyone, we forgot to mention, please fill out the surveys. Those are really helpful for us to develop trainings in the future. So we appreciate your honest feedback. Feel free to leave them on the desk or pass them to Elihu at the door on your way out.